Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, the Sex Edition. We're up all night. Look, sex, good stuff for you. And it's not just for young people, it's for old people too. So I hope you're listening. Now, here's the thing. You may have to get yourself down to the gym so that you'll be in shape for this kind of stuff. Because when it comes to lovemaking, you want to be ready. You want to be ready. You want to be smart about it. We're going to talk about a couple things. One of which I don't know how many of you who are listening have had this to deal with, but it comes from the place of being open with your partner. If you have a medical condition that you need to talk about, that you need to share that information. This is something, if you have a venereal disease, if you have a heart condition, whatever it is, you need to get that information out there ASAP. Now, I'm going to take this in stages. I always advocate being open and honest with your partner about who you are and what you're doing. Because when it comes to health and the fact that things can affect your partner, you want it to come from you. You don't want anything to come from the streets to come to the grapevine. Okay? That would not be something that you want to have happen. Because it really has to do with honoring yourself and honoring your partner. So let me tackle this one first, and it has to do with communicable diseases, whether it's warts, whether it's a venereal disease, something more serious like AIDS, or something on that order. You have to be in communication. Once you know something, you have to be in communication with your partner about it. Now, the likelihood that you could infect your partner is very high, especially in the occasion of, like, say, AIDS or something. When it comes to other things such as warts, that is a different issue, because where you could have the outbreaks can be in places where you don't have barrier protection. Barriers being like condoms and things like that. Okay, so that I make that distinction, you always want to be in communication with your partner. And if you are someone who has the occasional outbreak, let's say with herpes or something like that, you are contagious. And you should not be having sex when you are contagious. The medical doctors would say do not have unprotected sex. Well, what I'm wanted to add is that if you have outbreaks anywhere else other than, let's say, for men, if you have an outbreak on your penis, you obviously have to be protected, but it would be a good time to abstain. And something else, and a lot of people are into oral sex. You certainly do not want to be infecting your partner if you have an outbreak and then it's something that becomes an oral herpes thing, because now you're going to be sharing it back and forth, and that's not something you want to do. Have enough self-control to prevent having something like that happen, because that, I can tell you, that would be a very, very difficult conversation to have, because your partner is going to want to know why. They're going to ask questions like that. They're going to know why they didn't learn it sooner. How long have you known? Those sorts of things. So be proactive in things like that. Be safe. Think about your partner. Think about yourself. Think about your reputation, and really how you would want that to play out. And it's not even so much about being selfish, because I could make the example, hey, how would you want it if your partner had something wouldn't you want them to tell you? A lot of people can't even get their minds to be in that place when they're talking about being sexual and being passionate. That's why you have to really be upfront and be thoughtful about this before you get in the mood. Okay. You must be thinking about things like this. And that doesn't ruin your sexual experience. It's just one of those, there are things that happen in life and we have to learn to be responsible about them. So now following up with the other part that I started out with is if you have a medical condition, like say a heart issue, okay? Meaning if you've been to the doctor, and this isn't just for old people, because you'd be surprised at how many young people have heart issues. They take medications for things. And because of the advance of science now, people can have operations and do a lot of repair on the body that people had to live with in the past. And so if you're a person who has a heart issue, you want to share that information with your lover. Why? Because sex is and can be a very strenuous activity. And and it's not unusual for people to have heart attacks during sexual intercourse. It is not unusual at all. Ask first responders who have to respond to such a thing. And I know I say it tongue in cheek, but I'm really sincere. If you are feeling like you have a situation that you have to deal with, or that if you become sexual, that you shortness of breath, or you're feeling lightheaded, a number of things like you take a pause. You may need to be seeing a doctor before you can really get up to some strenuous sexual activity. Get that handled. Don't traumatize your partner by passing out on them because you have a medical condition. Aside from the embarrassment, and this isn't about shaming anyone, so throw out embarrassment. We're not talking about that. We're talking about your life. And this is something, and I'm going to talk about men, for example. It's interesting that for men, as they get at a certain point in their life where if they have trouble orgasming, then, because there's a lot of exertion that men put out in order to have an orgasm. So ladies, I want you to appreciate your man for bringing it home. You may see a lot of energy and effort and stuff going into that. It could push him to have a heart attack if you're somebody who's out of shape and out of condition. And that could be a pretty scary thing. So think about that. Make sure you're healthy for sexual activity. And one other thing, when you're taking medications, say a Viagra or something like that, which is to help sustain an erection, that little caveat they say that if your erection lasts longer than 3 or 4 hours, then to go seek medical attention. Well, let me tell you why that is. It's because blood in the male organ, which is what actually helps hold the erection, has to circulate through the body. And if it stays in the male organ because of an erection, there's a muscle that causes that blood to stay in there. It's to cause the constriction so that the blood does not flow out. Okay. So I'm describing it this way, that if that blood does not circulate and get reoxygenated as if it were pumping through your body, then what literally happens is those tissues in that part of the body actually will begin to die because of oxygen starvation. So that is why the caveat on the medication about how long a man can have an erection. So it's not just a joke, but that's a real serious medical condition. And there are medications that they can give the guy so that they can, get this thing fixed. They can get it corrected. But if you've never known the answer, it's because, as you know, when blood circulates around the body, one of the things that it does is it provides oxygen to all the tissues. And if a man has an erection and the blood is not circulating, then those tissues can die off. So, said differently, if your man has an erection and then it sort of becomes a little flaccid and it has an erection again, actually that's a healthy thing, because that's fresh blood coming in and going out, and it's going to keep his member safe. Probably didn't know that. Well, I actually talked to a doctor and got to find out about that kind of stuff so that I could share that with you on my podcast. So now you don't have to have any anxiety around that particular subject. You know the answer. Now I'm going to talk about women after the break and a few things for them to be concerned about. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, the Sex Edition. We're talking about being up all night. Now, here's something to consider. Women, we know that having a long sexual encounter can turn up, if there's a lot of passion, it can also turn up a lot of friction. And if you need lubrication, remember, have your favorite. Whatever it is, you could get the stuff that's sold in the adult stores. You can go to the drugstore. And guys, if you're listening, bring yours too. And condoms, bring your condoms. Why? Because it's safe. And be mindful that there are condoms that have lubrication. So if you already are using some lubricant, you don't have to get too much of, because you like to have a little bit of friction going on. And ladies, that's important for the guys. They like a little bit of friction because that's what helps them feel it. But here's the thing. After you've been going at it for a while, you might need to take a little bit of a break just to give the body a chance to relax so that you can stay in that huddle, that cuddle, and it makes it feel good, and then you can go for some more. Some people like to even take a break and get a snack and then come back and do it a little more. See, this is how you're going to be able to keep it up all night, because that takes energy. Because I know for myself, I have to do a little bit of eating between, and that helps me kind of relax, get rejuvenated, think about the passion some more, have a little bit of conversation, and then get back to business. So back to the women. No, so guys, if you listen to this, I want you to learn that women are all about the foreplay. That's what helps get them lubricated. That's what helps them feel good. And when they're moist, then they can really enjoy the sex, because the thing that you don't want your partner to experience is the pain of being dry, the dryness. And that happens. It happens, but you got to make it your job to see that your partner feels good, just as she makes it her job to make you feel good. You see, this is a mutual appreciation here, because you want to be able to come back and have seconds and thirds, because that's how you're going to keep it up all night. And as I talked earlier about being healthy enough for physical activity, see, the last thing you want to do is have it not happen because you're being inconsiderate. I'm talking to the guys here when it comes to relating to your partner. So remember, lubrication is what's going to help. And ladies, think about this. When a man has been physical, has been sexual for a while, here's the thing that happens to men, and young men, old men, it doesn't matter what the age is. But it's the experience that women have of that after a man has an orgasm, after he ejaculates, that he tends to fall asleep. So let me explain why that is. That's because there is a hormone called prolactin. And when that is released into a man's bloodstream, when he experiences that release of an orgasm and the prolactin is released, that is like a sleeping pill to a guy. So you notice how a guy can go and go and go and go. And we talk about delayed ejaculation. And now a lot of times we talk about that with respect to not having a guy finish too fast, because then he's over. And then it's hard for him to get an erection. And that sort of ends the pleasure for a lot of women. And it doesn't have to. You can use other devices. You can use dildos. So there's other things you can do to have a woman be stimulated. But I'm talking about feeling the sexual penetration of a man. And one of the techniques for delaying a man's ejaculation is when you put your hand on his member, you can use your thumb and put it right about at the bottom between where his scrotum and the penis is, and just use a little bit of pressure, and it helps delay the ejaculation. And for that, that'll help him last a little longer. But back to what I was talking about, and it was the experience of men falling asleep. This is something men can't help, because it's the hormone prolactin. It literally is like giving milk to a baby and putting him to sleep. You see, now after a while, he will wake up because the body will metabolize it and be up and ready to go again. But that's it. It's not that the man is trying to not be there for you, but that is something that he can't control. What men can do in order to sort of not circumvent what prolactin does, but maybe that. You can drink caffeine because it'll keep him hyped up. Whether it's coffee, whether it's sodas, whatever it normally does to you as an individual, I'm talking to your partner. If it keeps him up, caffeine is something that you can use. Alcohol, generally not, because alcohol doesn't necessarily make people stay awake. It tends to lower people's inhibitions, but it tends to relax people and could probably make them more sleepy. So if that's happening, you're probably not going to have the sex the way you want it, So not on the alcohol, but understanding how these things work on your body is real important. And I talked about the type of drugs like Viagra and what it does and what some of the side effects are. So yeah, he'll have a strong erection, but that's only healthy for a certain length of time. And as I explained, if it goes beyond what the doctors recommend, got to get him to the ER. But back to women and their needs. Keeping it consistent with both partners sharing the responsibility. Men, you got to take it upon yourselves to be sure that your partner is satisfied. And that means sometimes if you have had the conversation ahead of time, you're probably prepared. But it's okay to dialogue while you're pleasuring your partner, because that helps with the intimacy as well. And think about the mood. Some people like to set the mood with candles, with incense. Some like dim lighting. Some like it in the daytime. Some like it at night. Some like no lights, whichever. Decide it for yourselves and make that work. But all of this is important for having a nice sexual encounter. So what do you want to do? Prepare, because that makes it less awkward. And it's also nice to kind of have something to look forward to, kind of letting your partner know that there's something coming on. Because remember, men, for women, it's about the foreplay. It's about setting it up, giving her an idea of what's happening, and it starts in the mind. Guys tend to think more of a physical thing. Women, it's more emotional. And once you reach her there, then it's the sky's the limit. And then you can be up all night. There's a lot going on with that. So here's another thing. And some people ask, well, should we go out? Should we stay in? That's your choice. You don't have to spend a lot of money in order to have good sex. If staying at home and all of that effort that people put into getting dressed up to go out to go somewhere to eat and then to come back home and have an encounter. Sometimes there's a lot of work and a lot of time put into that. You can stay home and you can bring something in. If cooking at home isn't something that you feel like doing that evening, bring the takeout, have your intimate time and stay together. Spend that time together. That works. But you don't have to have a steady diet of that. If going out is what makes it special, then think about what makes it special. You see, again, that's part of the foreplay. That's what sets this up. That's where the good memories come from. And that's what makes you want to do it again so that you can stay up all night. I'm going to take a break here and we're going to come back and talk about this some more. Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and we're talking about up all night. Here's something that happens to couples when you have mismatched desires. You have the feeling that you want to be amorous, you want to have sex, and your partner does not. Okay, what do we do about that? I'm going to give you a couple ideas. Now, first of all, again, understand that this happens in many relationships. It is not unusual. It could have a lot of causes. Fatigue. When you have a person that's been working a lot, they may not necessarily feel like they want to be sexual, and they may not feel like they can be available for their partner. So the one who is wanting to be intimate, to be physical, is going to feel maybe a bit of rejection. They may even feel like they're not being loved. And this could be something that's gone on for a while. So there could be a lot of causes, and we'll want to look into that. If it's temporary, if it's because of fatigue, tired, it could be illness. These are things that we can look at. If it's something wrong with the relationship, then we need to take it apart and figure out what's going on. And the communication skills need to come in there. But one of the ways in which you can get through this, masturbation has always been there. I think we know what that is. Man, you can take care of yourselves. And you know what? It might even be a loving gesture for your partner to be able to help you with that. So you won't feel as if your partner is not caring about you, but it is a way for your partner to be there and be part of the experience without actually having to be physically intimate. So say in the case of men and women, she doesn't have to have penetration, but she can help you with the act of masturbating. And guys, it could be vice versa. So now here's something I'm also going to throw out there. And this has to do with having people outside of the relationship. Now, this is something that you're going to have to really be in conversation with your partner about. Some people are very comfortable with having lovers who are outside the relationship and being able to satisfy that sexual need that way. Others aren't. But this is where the communication definitely has to be there. There are many, many different lifestyles. And as the listeners would vary on this particular podcast, it would be helpful for me to acknowledge that. And some people are okay with their lover having other lovers. But then it goes back to the early part of this particular podcast, and I was talking about safe sex and taking care of your partner and making sure that you don't bring things back to your partner. So understand that there's going to be boundaries, that there's conversations that need to be had about the emotions regarding this. Now, I happen to know a lady who was very open and honest with her feelings about it. I mean, this wasn't a relationship that I was in. This is somebody that I knew who I had talked with her about her experience with men. And it was her feeling that she didn't care who her guy was out with as long as he understood that he could not fall in love with somebody else. Now, these were her words. These were her rules. Then he was free to go wherever he wanted to go. But he ultimately had to be there to pleasure her. And those were her rules. Those are her guidelines. And I put that out there to say that there are lots of possibilities for people. But you have to be in communication with your partner about what's okay and what isn't. And stick to that, because these kinds of things ultimately get discovered if we haven't already learned that time and time again with people and relationships and situations that get disclosed all kinds of ways. So if you are having an issue with your primary partner or your partner and the sex is not happening, it's important to find out why. If it's fatigue, then hopefully this will pass. It might be something as simple as you helping out with whatever is causing the fatigue. If it's a lot of chores around the house and your partner needs help, well, then help your partner. Make the partner more available for you. If it's the job thing that is taking up a lot of the time, there's probably not a whole lot you as a partner can do about that other than be understanding and supportive. But I think it's significant that the person who is not available to the relationship understand what's being, the burden on the other partner, on the lover, the one that wants the affection, that wants the attention. And it would be important to discuss some options as to what they feel they can do about that. Again, mismatched desire, there's nothing new about this. This has happened since the beginning of time. And what we do is we don't want to go underground. We don't want to go in hiding about it, because that creates some other things. And what intimate partners, if you don't know this, and if you haven't been in a relationship very long, intimate partners sense things on a molecular level. And when you're not being open and honest with them, and it may not even be something that you can perceive, but it's something that's going on with your partner's mind. And you may think that they're just pulling stuff out of thin air, but people become hypersensitive around the affection and the attention that they get. And when they perceive something is going on, people who are really super sensitive or very intuitive seem to find this out about themselves early on, and they trust their gut instinct. And there's nothing you can do to convince them otherwise. You can say all kinds of things, but their gut instinct is going to continue to fire off. So I'm going to encourage you as a person that, be in communication about your feelings, about your needs. And who knows, it may mean you have to revisit the quality of the relationship. And it may be a conversation that needs to happen. But whatever it is, have that conversation and move forward. Be adult about it, because then and therefore, you may find out something very good. You may find out the spirit of compromise that happens, because quite often when people aren't being there for their partner, sometimes they don't know it. Sometimes they don't realize it because they are so involved in what they are doing that they don't realize that they're neglecting their partner. So you as a person that's feeling neglected, bring it up. Bring it up in a tactful way. You got to do it in a way that allows conversation, and you just can't hammer and beat people up, because what ultimately we want is to get our sexual needs met by our partner. So creating the space that you can have that conversation I think will ultimately have good results. And if you're having difficulty with that conversation, have them listen to this podcast. Use that as a catalyst for having a good conversation. And I think what you will find is that it'll break the ice. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, the Sex Edition. This episode is entitled Up All Night. And I'm your host, John Johnson. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.